Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And like always, we have another very interesting guest here with us today. And before I introduce him, thank you so far for continuing with us on Future Fast. And I hope you're enjoying. And also, for those of you who have not subscribed, this is the time that you click on the subscription button right away. And now, jumping straight in, we have Tarang Gupta. He's pretty much a global executive, worked across different continents, starting from India, and today out of Manila. Tarang, welcome to Future Path. Thank you so much for making time to be with us here today.
Thank you, Nanchunda. Thank you for having and inspired by what you're doing. So happy to be sharing my journey, but also my experiences. Thank you again.
Wonderful. So, Tarang, diving straight in, can you share your journey, which is taken you across the globe, but maybe in a capsule to our audience and listeners?
Sure. No, thanks. Maybe I'll start with where I am today and then go back to my journey. So I'm currently the CEO and the managing director for the Friesland Campina Philippines business. Friesland Campina is one of the world's largest dairy cooperatives. So I'm being an FMCG boy all the way through. It's a multi-$100 billion business that we handle and that we run. In fact, I started my career in sales and marketing with Pofari and Unilever in India. And that's where my career in FMCG started way back in 2001, 2002. And then moved on to do global marketing, global strategies, M&As with a couple of different organizations, including Unilever. And then finally was here with Friesland Campina, which is since 2010, where I did global marketing, innovation strategy. I did senior commercial roles in Africa. And before my current role, I was a CEO for the Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei business and a market leader in the industry in that segment. And now as the CEO for the Philippines business. So yes, that's been my journey. Personally married happily with one daughter who is 15 years old.
Wonderful. Tarang, I'm sure a lot of people started career like you, but it obviously is not an easy thing to move. Most people, at least out of India, would be very comfortable or very actively seeking to move to Europe or US. So the kind of choices you made, which obviously now the whole West is looking at these regions, but when you made these were not the obvious choices, right? So what was those triggers? How was it that you started looking at this?
Nanchunda, you're not the first one. I have enough investment bankers as my friends. And when I was living in Singapore and making a decision to go to Nigeria, that was a question, why are you going there? I think the point is this. It's called, as you call yourselves as future fast, I would call it as back to the future. The developing and the emerging markets are leaping and frogging much faster than the developed countries. And the pace of impact and change that's happening there in these markets is phenomenal. And then if I look at also countries like India, the whole Africa, we talk about Africa being the next 1 billion people coming through. The impact that's there, the disposable increase, the sheer delta of disposable income increase is phenomenal. Same is the case in Philippines. Consistently an economy driving, other than the 1 year of pandemic, at about 6 to 7% GDP for last 20 years, and a CAGR of 6 to 7%, fast growing middle class income. The pace of change is much faster. The second thing, which is very important from a cultural dynamics point of view, and that's very important in industries like ours, which is an FMCG industry, is that the current generation of you and me, believes that tomorrow is going to be better than today. But if you do the same research in many of the other developed West countries, what you see here is that they feel a little bit more gloomy about future. And that's where the dynamics are shifting. The spending, the growth, the appetite to grow, appetite to take risks is coming up in the developing and emerging markets. So I was extremely lucky that after doing my global strategy, innovations, and M&A roles, I got an opportunity to work in West Africa. And then, of course, I've been in Southeast Asia, and I see this across the countries. And the culture is phenomenal, but the appetite to grow and take risks is also phenomenal. And that was the reason behind taking these decisions.
Coming from India and also moving to Singapore, cultural shift would be not as significant. But when you move to Africa and Far East, these things, and also from a role that you are in the FMCG business, it's a direct touch point from a consumer thing. So how do you adopt, and how do you explain your continuous growth, right, as a leader? How easy or difficult is it to get into it?
So, Nanjunda, I was told once, and this very senior leader who runs a company called Cultural Synergies, and he was a mentor when I was quite young. So I've been out of India for now about 18 years, 17 years. But moving around different cultures, and especially in my global role when I was managing projects spanning to about 15 countries or so. So 15 different cultures sitting on the same call. I was told by this leader or this mentor that during the 50s to the 80s, it was all about IQ. Between the 80s to the 2000, it was all about EQ. And that's when you see all the elements that came through in terms of leadership paradigms. And since the 2010s, because with the fast growing global economies and the world becoming smaller, it's all about CQ, your cultural quotient. Because we all grow in a homogeneous culture, and we think that we're going to operate the way we were groomed. But being understanding where the other culture comes from is a huge delta to success. Because if you don't understand the perspective of the culture, doing business in that culture becomes extremely difficult. And then you can take the divide between the Brit to the US to the Japanese to a Filipino to a Chinese. Every culture's paradigm is very different. And the starting points are very different. So as leaders of multinationals, we have to groom ourselves to understand the culture. And thus, a very, very simple, when you walk into a new country, it's just the 3 L's. You first listen. Second, you learn. Even before you think about leading. The biggest mistake that the leaders do is they go into it and they think they've known it all. Or if it has worked in an X market, it could. From a content-wise, it could. Content-wise, it could. But content is only 50% of the success. The contextual elements become extremely important. And thus, it's first listen, learn only before you start leading, and absorb the culture. Absorb the culture. And I'm lucky that I'm in the FMCG industry, which is very close to the culture. If I can spend 5 days with marketing team, I will understand the culture of the country quite a bit, because that's how the FMCG industry is. But spend time with your consumers, spend time with your customers, spend time on the road, spend time with the taxi guy. Understand that culture of why, and ask the questions, the why, where, how. The moment a culture seeps in, the leaders become far more successful, because today's world is all about cultural quotient. Even in India, with the diaspora diversity that we have, it's massive. It's massive, and we cannot say that one thing that works in the East is going to work in the South.
And the world's also changing so fast, right? And it's so volatile, so unpredictable. And in some sense, it's also been risky. There's a war happening as we speak, and it's more than a year since it got started. So how do you handle this as a leader? Because you have multiple touch points, a lot of countries today, like you said, world's become much smaller, but people's identities are becoming larger. So how do you handle that one, from keeping up with the consumers' aspirations and managing these large corporations and handling people from different nationalities? So what's your mantra of leadership in this kind of a scenario?
It's a look. I mean, just to give you a perspective, I've got 5 different in my management team of 11 currently. I've got 5 different nationalities, but I've got 11 different individuals, and I think the important part in and I'll be honest. That's my approach, Nanjunda, which is very simple. It's freedom within a framework. As a team, you agree upon the framework of what you want to achieve and what's the end goal. And then you create enough freedom for your people. Because that's one perspective. I've worked with the leaders who love to micromanage. And I have realized more and more and more, micromanagement is the different world of letting fear of failing. And the moment as leaders, you accept that by leading, you are ready to let your people, you accept the freedom of or fear of failure, you start leading people and the results are far bigger. So specifically to answer your question, there are different needs of consumers, there are different functions. I mean, within an organization, if I look at my multiple plants versus my commercial, that's 2 different worlds, different nationalities in the management team, different changing consumer needs. You don't try controlling all of that. You just create a framework and then let the experts and the functions drive to that framework. So that framework becomes very critical to form. But also that framework needs to be not very rigid, because if you keep the framework rigid, you start stifling the growth of the organization.
So what you say sounds almost like be like water. So just flow in and keep everything afloat, but be like water. Don't freeze anything to it. Give the mobility to each of us.
Look, I mean, I'll be honest about it. When I was in Nigeria, and I'll give you, that was my first large business country role. And I realized that in the 3 years, I've seen 200% currency devaluation. I have seen country with no foreign exchange. So we are talking about multi-$100 billion business, and you don't have foreign exchange. How do you run? The country does not have it. To the situation of saying that the country shut down, to the situation that the factory had burned down because of a calamity. What solid situation are we talking about? What we are saying is, if you have your framework very clear, and those frameworks can be very different. For an FMCG, it's a very simple framework. We call lag KPIs, right? I want to grow market shares and grow volumes and grow. What is the core KPI that we are here? Stick with the consumer and be with the consumer by driving penetration. The more you penetrate, the more you grow. Okay. If that's your simple framework as an the whole organization starts moving towards it, whatever may be the situation.
And I mean, that sounds crazy. I think probably someday you should write a book about your experience in Nigeria during those days itself. But having gone through that, and obviously your leadership style sounds as easy, but I'm sure it's a lot more difficult because everybody, every leadership book talks about it, but we know how many leaders consistently succeed in this scenario. But do you want to talk about the mistakes that you have gone through or you made, and what kind of learning and how was that ecosystem that helped you to look ahead, and what are the things that you do today that what you learned out of those mistakes have helped you to handle better?
Yeah. So, Ananjunda, without going into the content, because then we can take hours together, I'll again, you referred back to Nigeria, so I'm gonna talk about that, and this was 2014. Before that, I was the global category director for a large platform based out of Singapore. Go in to run the commercial business of a huge commercial business in Nigeria or for West of Sub-Saharan Africa. I walked in as a smart cookie, know it all. this is what we need to do, because I could see it. I could see it from 30,000 feet high. This is exactly what we need to do. Landed in the biggest mistake, first 6 months, this is how we're going to do. And now we all know in emerging and developing hierarchical organizations, the boss says, the organization follows. And we failed. We failed. I failed because there was quite a few wrong decisions. And that was my biggest learning, which is why I say that when you see it from 30,000 feet high, you're able to see the framework. But the moment that framework becomes a directive, the organization fails. And that's my biggest learning. And then after 6 months, I picked myself up and I said, okay, we're going to do it differently. And then was about, everything is moving around. You don't have foreign exchange. You don't have this. The competition is moving in as a huge market leader. But if you're in a business of 80% market share and a massive giant, say, okay, no, we're going to turn the tide around. Where do we want to go? How do we go there? And then you start creating. It said empowerment. I call that empowerment as a little different. It's not empowerment, it's powering them. It's because we believe when you empower your people, okay. No. You give them the power to make decisions, give them the power to think, give them the power to fail, create that. And then the organization starts moving. But you keep looking at it. So what's important is, as leaders, what I learned then is we have two roles at the same time. You've got to constantly look from the top for the framework. But the moment you go down, you're not there to control, but to offer as a resource.
Right.
That's where the difference is. Don't go down into control, but to lead as a resource. And lead as a resource. Remove their obstacle. And thus things start changing. So to give you an example, we did a pilot, and in a country like, talking about West Africa, but I've done that now in the other markets as well. What is FMCG? FMCG is all about the more the outlets, it needs to be available in those grocery stores. That's where the business happens. That's where in any of the emerging markets, 60 to 70%, in some markets, even 90% happens. But technology can disrupt it. So we started creating tools wherein we became the interface between the small grocery store, the large supermarkets, and we started creating technology platforms which were owned by us, but they were free to use by them for any other suppliers. So we started creating that, the hub and spoke model using technology. The normal way of working would have been, no, drive more distribution, get more people on the ground, that's fine, but that is also OPEX and CAPEX expensive. This became a different model, and that started to create more opportunities for growth for us. So it's what I mean to say is that you create opportunities by powering your people rather than only empowering them.
Thank you so much, Tarang. And
thank you very much.
I would like to ask the listeners and audience to follow you. The link is below in the podcast. Do follow some great work and the kind of experience he brings across the different geographies. So, and also the thought process, you heard it, so you know it better. And do share it across with all your network. And once again, Tarang, thank you so much for making time to be with us and share your journey. And very, very beautiful insight from your industry, and as well as with that rich experience on leadership as well, which is great. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Manchanda. All the best and future fast.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Take care.
And yeah, lastly,
Bye.
all of you, those who have missed following, subscribe to it right away. Thank you again.